Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of the Planning Commission podcast. Today's episode, I'll take planning legends for 1,000 with Dan Burden, planning legend extraordinaire.
The Planning Commission podcast is a discussion you never even knew you needed. Sit back, join us for a conversation between a couple of old friends and their guests to talk about all the things that are happening in this wide-ranging profession called planning. Our views are our own and don't reflect those of any national planning organizations or any particular public agencies and only belong to us. So read your commission packet, know your Robert's rules, and enjoy this, the Planning Commission podcast.
All right, let's start off with some roll call. Commissioner Minshaw.
Present.
And Commissioner Kostelik.
I'd like to make it a true daily double.
And I am here. All right, let's kick off a great episode. I'm looking forward to this one for sure. Our agenda, discussion item, whiskey pairing, our interview, then our lightning round. Commissioners, can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Don't jump in at one time.
I'm
Waiting.
I'm letting you have the pauses this week.
Okay.
Are you
There
going
we
to
go.
second it, or are we just
Oh,
like
yeah,
letting me make a
second,
motion?
sorry.
Okay.
There we go.
Got
Thank
all
you. Thank you very
distracted.
much.
Okay.
Good heavens. Thank you, Robert's Rules. All right. To our audience, just as a reminder, you can find all our past meetings on our website, www.theplanningcommissionpodcast.com. Go to YouTube, Amazon, Apple, Spotify, subscribe, like, and give us feedback. We certainly encourage and look forward to that. So our episode today is with, he's a top 100 planning thinker of all time. I don't remember where on the list his highest ascension got, but I know it's pretty darn high. Higher than you two and me multiplied by 10 combined. I'm going to guess that, right? So Dan has been just, such a foundational voice in our profession for quite a number of years. Today, we're going to talk mostly about some bicycle stuff. He's again such a pivotal person in this movement in particular, but also walkability and a whole bunch of other things, health and bringing environmental justice issues to light and just so on and so forth. So we're gonna have a really good discussion. So I'm gonna ask the two of you first a discussion item, and that is, do you have a planning hero? And if so, who is that?
I feel like we should have had that ahead of time.
And why? I if you need me to start and buy you some time, I can do that.
Yeah,
All right,
go for that.
You don't see my nose
Okay.
goes. Not it. You go first.
So
Nose goes.
all right. So I have definitely had a few people I would say are on my, good old proverbial Mount Rushmore of planning, and Dan is one of them. So I will go the easy route today and go with Dan, but just as a little backstory of why. So when I first started my career, I was in my wonderful public agency cubicle. Oh, those are just everywhere, right? And I got sort of tapped on the shoulder and said, hey, you want to go with this guy today? He's going to go around our city and talk about, the landscape planning, walkability, and all that stuff. And I'm like, wait, I get a chance to go outside and I work for a public agency? Yes, let's go, right? And I had no idea who Dan Burden was at the time. But there I was in the back of a pickup truck, and I'm going around and we're getting out. He's got his tape measure and he's, measuring all these things and talking about the things in walkability that I just glommed onto immediately. We talk about, emergency vehicle access and lane widths. And I'm just like, wow, this is awesome. This is so cool. And the seed was absolutely planted, and man, it was a wonderful start of what I later became in terms of my own career. I think trying desperately to try, and walk in those footsteps of Dan. And I was happy to report that, whatever it was, a year and a half ago, we, co-led a walk audit in Northern California. And I just kind of had that moment going, holy cow, I'm here with this guy that I've looked up to for so darn long. And so, yeah, it was a fun time and still is. And I am now happy to call Dan a friend, and it's been wonderful. So hopefully that's enough time to buy for the two of you. Eager to hear what you have to say.
Go ahead, Don.
Oh, I'm going to go pretty far afield here, and this might get me in trouble in some circles.
Oh boy.
I'm going to go with Saul Alinsky. And if you don't know who Saul Alinsky was, Chicago guy, big time social movement activist, dating back to the 60s or so. And he wrote a book or an essay called Rules for Radicals. And I think oftentimes, especially in the bike ped realm, which is where we cut our teeth and kind of found our passions, and certainly Dan was an inspiration on that. If you're working in that realm, I don't think you can help but become at least an advocate, if not an activist for those things, because of the pushback you get, the battles we've all fought, and have all been there. And it kind of turns you into that. And certainly if you look in the planning literature, there is things about activist planning and the roles we should play. And really in the code of ethics of AICP is about really representing the equity and other issues, which I think sometimes causes you to be that way. And in Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, my favorite one, and you guys who know me know I use this all the time, one of them is make an agency live up to their policies, because there's no way they can live up to all of them. And as you point out those policies and you find those things, it's your policy, but we've become so convoluted in policies, much like you say, Chris, there's 25 competing goals in a comp plan that you can make a case for whatever. It's the same for that. I had a professor at University of Illinois, Chicago, who had been alongside Alinsky and stuff like that. So definitely a controversial figure in a lot of ways, but that's where I'm going to go.
I think that's pretty perfect. I know that anytime we talk about like ADA and you begin a conversation about the folks who began ADA by saw cutting the corners of intersections, I think it's in Chico or something.
Yeah, jackhammering, curb cuts.
A little tear comes to your eye, because I think that I think that you wish that there was a time machine to where you could go back in, where that mustache would totally fit in, by the way, and be able to participate in that type of a thing, because you're doing it on behalf of a group of people who really need to be advocated for, right? I mean, that's really what it boils down to. Yeah. All right, Sabrina.
You guys are going to be surprised by mine, but it's actually the one that came to mind, so I'm going with it. As you do know me, I believe for sure in planning for the process. I've always been a plan for implementation. You know, if we don't just
not planning for the sake of planning.
That's right.
You gave me that phrase some while ago.
Yeah. So, you know, it goes along with hold up to the policies, but it has to result in something at some point. And that doesn't mean that the lead time's always short. One person who's always stuck with me since then is actually a politician. Mick Cornett, mayor of Oklahoma City from 2005 to 2015, I believe, maybe a little bit longer. He has been a speaker at a few places, both here in Boise. Met him a couple times, also brought him up to Spokane when I was at the MPO up there. But if you do some work with him, he really led the charge for, one, putting Oklahoma City on a diet, both himself and others. But it was really about, you know, Oklahoma City being in the South was all about fast food and quick meals and not really sense of place. And so they really talked about what did it look like to get out and walk. And also under his watch, they took their economic development money and how they would be successful in recruiting companies and made it be about how they put connections and pedestrian infrastructure and transit infrastructure in downtown. And when he tells the story, he talks about that part of why they did that is over and over again, they were losing out to big companies coming to Oklahoma City and would always come in second or third. And so they finally sent their team out, talked to the site selectors and said, why are you not choosing us? And they said, well, our employees who we also send out to look at these places don't want to live there. They don't want to live there. You don't have a good downtown. You don't have connections. You don't have a sense of place. It doesn't have all those things that are important in a place. And so they took that to heart. And instead of just doing incentives to companies to come, they invested it in their community and then really saw the results change. And that's just always stuck with me.
That's leadership. That's leadership, right? That's great. That's a great story, and a person that, yeah, not in the planning industry, but doing planning things, right? And implementation is really what I hope we're about. We don't want to just have these grandiose visions and then, okay, well, off to the next vision. And that can be, frustrating, I think, for a lot of us planners. We want to see our stuff come to fruition.
And what I hear in that story is what I think, and Dan to talk about. Historically, our idea of business retention was, well, we just need good water, good sewer, and a good road. And we're to the point, A, everybody has that. And B, companies are looking for the quality of life stuff and those things, because in one way or another, the spouses of the executives and others also have to live there and raise families there. And that appealing thing has definitely become kind of the modern competition in that realm, which is good for us, right?
Yeah.
Right. And I'm sure Dan can talk about that as we get into this interview about, how does walkability and urban design and bicycles, how does that play into economic development recruitment? How does that play into
That's a good
identity?
question. Yeah. And we'll get to that in just a minute. So let's transition to the whiskey pairing. Mr. Don Kostelek, what do you have?
Yeah, something I've always admired about Dan, and I think we can definitely speak of the inspiration that he provided us as young cub planners at the Ada County Highway District, and thinking about Dan being a guy that's always done it his way and something admired.
Oh,
so
I know where you're going. I know where you're going. Wait, no. Yep, Sinatra. There it is.
The Jack Daniel's Sinatra Select, a special edition of that. They score the barrels differently than the normal Jack Daniels. Sinatra's really given credit of making Jack Daniels the brand it is today and saving the whiskey industry. So doing it our way with this. And of course, nowadays, when you hear that, I can't think of, I screened with Cola Garden, did it my way. So that stupid thing gets in your head instead of the great
Can you
Sinatra
repeat that?
song.
Do it one more time.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Okay.
You know the jingle.
And that particular bottle went from Tennessee to the San Diego area, where I brought it back another 1,000 miles to you. So it's been on quite a venture. Yeah. Man, it's got some miles on it.
Yeah, almost as many as Dan has on the frequent flyer.
Oh my gosh, you're not kidding. We'll get into that, and we're going to get into that right now. So we'll introduce Dan in just a quick second. Just as a reminder, we would like to take a quick moment and thank our friends at Plan Edison for supporting today's podcast. If you're looking to sharpen your urban planning skills and advance your planning career, Plan Edison Courses is the place to go, which offers over 300 courses on cutting-edge planning topics and skills such as parking reform, missing middle housing, equity analysis, and climate resilience. Visit courses.planedison.com/PC10 to take advantage of an exclusive offer for Planning Commission podcast listeners. And now, without further ado, the man of the hour, the legend in our field, Mr. Dan Burden. Dan, welcome to the Planning Commission podcast.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here. And I was able to listen in on Roger Millar's podcast earlier and took inspiration from that.
So. Oh yeah. That was a good time we had last season. I think in fact, there was a Frank Sinatra reference at the beginning of that, where I butchered a song and made it, fantastic. So, all right, Dan, tell the audience, if the audience doesn't know who you are, man, first of all, they need to. But for those maybe younger planners and less familiar with you, your background, how you just became interested in all these things, specifically around bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure and design, all the different things that you have touched on in your really long and illustrative career.
Sure. Well, I came through this portal into urban design through bicycling. At the time that the Death and Life of Great American Cities was being released, I also graduated from high school that year, 62, and all I wanted to do was to find ways to get more people to ride bicycles. And so I had already dreamed up the idea that one day I would bicycle around the world, later refined that to Alaska to Argentina,
Hmm.
since I'd only have to learn 2 languages or one new language. And I became known as a result of that expedition. It was written up in National Geographic. It was the first article on bicycling in National Geographic.
Hmm.
And a lot of media covered bicycling back then. When I started in a city as large as Columbus, Ohio, uh, I I knew all 6 of the other adult bicyclists.
Hmm.
I mean, that's all there were. And so there was really fresh ground. And but as I would expand what I did, uh, I became pretty well known in the certainly the world of bicycling. But then I was eventually hired by Florida to become their first bicycle coordinator. That would have been in 1980. And I had a lot of credentials for holding that post, although I had never worked in government. And then uh, within a month, Australia was asking me to come over and show what we were doing in the States, which wasn't much.
Hmm.
And I realized that it's not about bicycling, it's about walking. And so I came back and changed my job title to state bicycle and pedestrian coordinator and became the first in the country. And then almost immediately focused only on walking. Bicycling could take care of its own. It had its own advocacy. Uh, People understood that they were overlooking bicycling, but they didn't understand the importance of walking and how we build cities around walking. That all the great cities in the world were designed for walking. And we had forgotten that in our country. Only a few cities were still considered walkable, places like Boston or New York City, possibly Washington, D.C., given that same status. So as I evolved the walkability side, I became very well known, certainly in my state. And people would come to me and say, Dan, it's if walking is going to work, you've got to be doing even more. You've got to be designing our cities better. So I got involved in urban design. After I've been doing this 12, 14 years, I ended up joining Gladding Jackson, one of the better small boutique urban designing firms, people like Ian Lockwood, Walter Kulash. So I wanted to be mentored by them. And turns out that they equally saw what I would be able to bring, and was able to start just doing project after project on building walkable communities. Still sticking with bicycling. And then I decided I wanted a bigger sandbox. So I expanded to where I did work all over the country. I've now worked in all 50 states, about 6 provinces in Canada, roughly 3,800 communities. And every community I go to, they teach me new things. Everyone always says that their community is unique, special, different. You've all heard
Yes,
that,
they
right?
do. Yes, they do.
And it's actually true. Um, you know, each community has different political leadership. They're in a different place and time. They have different things they've achieved, things they'd like to. So anyway, all of this, I want to sidestep back just a little bit. What got me really known in my field when I was just getting started, and this would have been 80, 82, something like that. I realized it wasn't about the technical things in bicycling or walking or even urban design. It was about community engagement, that engineers had come to be known as people who could solve your problem, but they were following an old script, and all they were doing really was moving traffic faster or reducing the delay and things like that. And everything they did would further destroy or erode a neighborhood or a street or even a block. So I decided, no, we need to be communicating with the people. And so I went back to college and got my master's training in interpersonal communications, how people communicate. And then knowing that I was skilled at photography, I developed all my repertoire around telling stories, but doing them with photos. So that allowed me to go in, work with the community, and have an impact because of the style I evolved or developed. Fast forward now to uh, probably 2006. Dan Buettner gave me a call one day and he said I was recommended by all the top medical uh, universities. And they said, if you want to build walkability, this is the person to do it. So Dan and I teamed up and did the first Blue Zone community in the US, Albert Lee, Minnesota. And that put the health perspective behind everything we do. So it wasn't just dealing with equity, dealing with the forgotten modes of transportation and the other things we're doing to harm our communities. It gave another emphasis on why we should be doing it a particular way, because the health of our nation has so declined. People find it very challenging to get any exercise, and yet the nations or the areas of the world where people are living the longest, happiest, healthiest lives are truly the most walkable. So anyway, I got involved with that. And now I work for Blue Zones and work in dozens of communities with a health perspective as well. So that's kind of the quick story.
Dan, as a follow-up, I mean, you covered some of the history of both your career and what we saw maybe in the last few decades in the United States, but when did you really start to see the evolution connecting walking, biking with the kind of the traffic calming urban design? Really is like an intentional strategy. When did you start to see that evolve and change in the history?
I would say not until after the Congress for New Urbanism was formed. Not that they got it. They kept focusing on just the urban design, pure stuff. They weren't talking about block lengths and the speed of traffic and how you induce the proper speed through design. But eventually they came around and started to use the word walkable. But it's been an evolution. There was no light bulb moment where people figured it out. But more and more political leaders started to get it. I'm remembering a mayor in Charlotte, North Carolina, who was a very conservative Republican. He said, if my cohorts don't get it, it's all about building cities for people. And then the great minds of the world, Jan Gehl, who's a brilliant architect, but his wife, who was a human behaviorist, said, your places don't work. They're not designed for people. And he got it. And he's been leading the challenge. So more and more very brilliant minds have been figuring this out. And you add one to the next, to the next. And after a while, you've got an entire discipline.
So I've often wondered too, if you just talk about the era in which you came up and all the influences you've had on safer infrastructure over the years. Not only do I want to get at what you might be impressed with that, but do you ever wish you could go back and have like a celebrity death match with John Forrester?
Well, John Forrester and I used to, back when you didn't have computers, but we would find a way to communicate with one another. I hate to say it, but John probably did far more harm than anyone in our country to hold bicycling back.
Yeah, it definitely pivoted us away from that. Yeah. And yeah, so in the advancements though we've made, I mean, you went to Florida in 1980, we're 43 years down the road. What impressed you with that and what we have embraced as both a design and planning profession?
I think what really caught my attention, I was doing everything I could. When I first started, they would never hear of a bike lane. I mean, they're virtually unheard of. And I theorized, okay, well, let's at least add width to our road so that later when people figure it out, we've got the space for the bike lanes. So we ended up adopting policy where all roads in Florida, uh, designed by the state and all the counties followed suit, that we'd add wide curb lanes. So like 15 feet wide, and or 14 feet. And then the other lanes were so wide that when we went to build bike lanes or buffered bike lanes, there was plenty of width to do it. So we got a head start over many of the states by just anticipating what we'd be allowed to do in the future.
Okay, Dan, the world has been evolving fairly quickly in the world of e-bikes and scooters and all of the different things that we're seeing out in our cities. I'm just curious your general impressions. Is this a good thing? Is this a challenge? And how do we adapt our now current thinking and future thinking to these types of modes that we're seeing out and about?
Yeah, e-bikes in particular, I own three. And I love them, but pedal assist, not turn the throttle and go the speed that you end up with. I think uh, it's a plus and it's a negative. I think overall it's going to be a strong plus that people are going to have other ways to get around that are within their means. But what I feel challenged by with e-bikes is a lot of people are turning to e-bikes that don't have the skills to ride safely or correctly. And so I think we need more education, more training before a person takes off and starts riding an e-bike and at the speeds they do.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. We've got some friends here in the Boise area that have been in the bike shop business for a couple decades, and they're kind of closing it up and moving on to some other less stressful things. But one of their reasons for it was the e-bike pivot, but not from like a sales and that perspective, was what you said. The people coming in that wanted them were not necessarily equipped and understanding of skills, rules, mindset, all those kind of other things that were there. And so for them, it was not as appealing anymore because they found that to be a battle. And they certainly didn't want to sell a product to someone who couldn't go out and functionally operate it well. So that's interesting that you said that. We don't hear that very often.
Yeah, it's a very important aspect of anything we do that's new. It really needs some understanding by the people who are taking on that next activity, right? And so with e-bikes, I just wish we had better training courses and easy to watch videos and everything that teaches a person how to deal with traffic and how they belong and are needed as part of the transportation system, but don't do it that way. Yeah.
That idea of new, right? Like new and change, you have to adapt to it. I mean, maybe it leads to a little bit different of a question of what about the next generation of planners coming? I mean, I don't know. I don't know when I became that person where I start having planners work for me that are the age of my children. We're reminiscing about, when we met, 15, 20, 25 years ago. So how can that next generation of planners or urban designers be better prepared for what's coming in the next 25 years? Not just with bicycle facilities, but, traffic calming, urban design, walkability.
I think for anyone to really be profound in the planning profession, they need to fall in love with cities. They need to understand equity issues and see the much bigger picture than just zoning or code or anything like that. They need to understand the health, the whole reason people exist in a community and why we need communities. We just have to, if we're going to save the planet, then we've really got to live in urban spaces and we got to make them better. So I think anyone going into planning really needs to to have that greater appreciation for the power and the importance of planning, and overcome the negative image of planning from the past, right? Where planners were a big part of the problem. In fact, I've often shared, I think the planners created the mess that engineers are trying to bail us out with. Oh, well, mathematically, we can figure out a better way to move more traffic. No, the planners are the ones who are dividing us with all the cul-de-sac communities and the things that make it quick and easy for a developer to get in and make their impact, and at the same time be destroying the very sense of a neighborhood or a community.
Yeah, you definitely get those factions playing off of each other kind of as mutually convenient whipping posts in a lot of ways. And I think back when you were working with us at Ada County Highway District, that was definitely the internal battles going on with that. So in thinking this next 25 years, I'm an advocate, I'm a citizen, I'm interested in this stuff, I'm even a planner. Who do we need to be targeting to bring them around more? Who isn't pulling their weight in this arena that we need to get at?
Well, definitely our elected leaders. For anyone in this field as an advocate or whatever role they are playing, is to reach the upcoming elected leaders and make sure that they understand why they're running. And it's not just to build their political career, it's to actually rescue a neighborhood or a group of people. Every political decision should be backed by, does this make sense? Are we building a community that is going to pay its own way, and that's going to reduce the number of people who end up giving up their lives every year? All these things, and to think about how we take those steps and make sure there's a strategic plan in every community to do that.
Yeah, I
So
think I
Dan,
know all of us have the conversations of when a sidewalk has become weaponized in a political culture war. That's pretty darn frustrating, and we could have a whole episode on that. Chris?
well, I was just thinking, you've had such a long career in so many ways in different states, and as you mentioned, I mean, all 50 states. Holy cow. I mean, that's astounding to me. But I think most of us, especially as you get further along down the road of your career as a planner, it's bound to happen where you're going to get accused of some conspiracy theory, black helicopter type of a thing, and of course, I think we hear it as much anymore, but Agenda 21 and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just curious, Dan, you're one of the kindest souls there is, in addition to being good at what you do. But even you, I'm sure, have been accused of all sorts of shenanigans. And I'm wondering if you could share either how you want to put it, your top or worst three, however you want to say it, moments that you've experienced or endured, maybe a better word.
Well, I think taking it back to the Tea Party and Agenda 21, which never made sense. It was funded heavily by the Koch brothers, I later came to realize. And now that people are against 15-minute cities, it's like you're taking away our freedoms. No, it's just the opposite, right? It's making transportation affordable again. It's giving you a chance to pick which mode of transportation you're going to use this trip or whatever. And yes, it's so easy for a group to become funded and to go off in this radical departure. But I think we need these things. I really do. For people to realize we might lose this in our community because these people so believing whatever somebody came up with is so radical that now we can build a rational basis for why we should be building cities for people, and not induce speed and do the things that are destroying our nest where we live, right?
Tell us your favorite success story? You know, whether it's a project, whether it's a planner or engineer, like give us the optimism. Where have you seen that when you think back to like maybe something you didn't think was going to happen and it was successful? What would you share?
Well, two stories. I can't boil it down to one. I shouldn't boil it down to two. But there's a town in California that I was invited in to work on their bicycle pedestrian master plan. And when I got there, it was Lancaster, California. When I got there, I just couldn't believe this freshness, the quality of this downtown, their main street. And I was then asked to go in and stand before the council. And they looked at me more strangely than any group I've ever stood before. And they said, and I just had to say it, why are you looking at me this way? They said, well, Dan, you're responsible for our new Main Street. And I'd never been to the town. And I was reminded that, oh, maybe 6 years earlier, I had delivered a keynote address to the California Main Street Association, a group of maybe 200, 300 people in the audience. When you finish a keynote, you never know if you've had an impact or not.
Yeah.
And so it was so funny that I had motivated the city planner and an elected leader to then go back and have a beer and say, we can do what this man just shared with us. And they hired a brilliant consulting firm, Polizaitis, and they designed it, they built it, and now it's one of the most successful new urban places in America. So just through a 30-minute presentation, I had that impact on a city, and lives of people will never know what inspiration it took. But another one, I'm even more proud of this one. I was doing a presentation to the Public Works Association for the state of Washington. And late in my presentation, somebody got up and left the room. I said, well, that's rude. I was just getting to my main point. And didn't know why this person got up and left. It turns out it was the public works director for a town called University Place, Washington. Mm-hmm. And not more than a month later, I was asked to come in to that city and inspire, and then another trip and another trip. And it turns out that they built a main street that didn't even exist. And they've done 5 road diets, taking lanes away. They've became the stellar brand new place for a roundabout, the first roundabout in the state. So all these things out of, again, a short presentation. So
I was thinking in that California example to just kind of go, I'm going to go cash my check and have a couple weeks vacation since my job here is already done, right?
It was amazing to see that. But to know that any new young planner, if they develop their skills and they come across the right way with an audience, that's going to do far more than whatever else they could do. So we need those new inspiring leaders to be able to play that role.
What about that person that ever had that person describe the story where they're the biggest skeptic the moment you walk in, and by the time you're there a week, 2 months, whatever, they're kind of eaten out of your hand? I'm sure you've had several of those.
Yeah, one of the people you most want to reach over time is the skeptic, the person who says, we can never do this, or we've already tried that, or this person's giving us fantasies. When you can convince that person to become a true leader and to become the motivator of their community, that you can't stop that person. They're going to really bring the change you need in the community. And I've had a half dozen, and I just love it when we're able to do that.
That's a good point of it, being able to take that energy that they have, which is an important piece, and turn it around. And yeah, that can be a bigger change agent than the folks that are already carrying your flag, right? Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. And I like to say, in the field that I'm in, if I meet with, say, 20 or 30 communities, maybe 15 you'll never hear from again. Maybe they'll start doing some things differently, but it's the 5 that are going to now go out and do things and become the great models in their state. That's really what it's all about, is how do you cast that net and find the one really profound community that was just ready. The timing was right. Whatever series of events had been occurring, now the ears are sharp and they're going to listen very well and start to work on it. That's really all you can do if your job is to motivate people, right?
So Dan, first of all, you said something to me when we first met that it struck a chord, and I'm going to come back to this. It struck a chord with me. I'll never, oh my gosh, never forget. I asked you about how often you were on the road back in those days. And this was, I think this was about 15 years ago, and your response, I will never, ever forget it. You said, oh, I think this year it'll be about 330 days out of the year. And I was just blown away. Like, what? This man has covered some serious ground. So in thinking back of all of the years that you've been doing this, I mean, and to be honest, a lot of your success has come from a good pair of shoes, a tape measure, and what's in your head, right?
And a vest. He's got the
vest. And a vest, of course. And I'm sitting here in my head now, I'm thinking to myself, well, obviously technology continues to evolve, and we as planners have many more tools at our fingertips, whether it's, simple things, whether, not simple, but GIS, and even looking at things that Google Earth, you can't, I don't have to hop in a vehicle and go look at it. But I'm wondering if that is good or if that is not so good for us as a planning, profession, about this evolution of technology versus a more simplified sort of approach. Not to undermine your efforts, of course, by that, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and you are right that back before the pandemic, I was on the road about 330 days a year, and I loved it. It was in my blood, and I always felt bad when I wasn't doing that, right? But as a result of the pandemic, we developed some new technologies and tools in a heartbeat, right? We had to. And now we can do work in a community with a different approach. We still need that being there in person. If we're going to really inspire people and pump them up, you've got to be there for that. But there's so much we can do now with Google Earth alone.
Yeah.
There's a number of new tools I use every day that weren't available to us 3 or 4 years ago, or they weren't that far along in their development. So I think the future, where the planner of the future really should be looking, is how do we tap into each new piece of technology so that we can get ideas across in more crisp and fresher ways that are going to reach those who are thirsty for this information and will become the leaders of the future, right?
Well, I look at it, are we going to have like the artificial intelligence comp plan and measure that against the ones we've had with natural intelligence, and see which ones comes across better?
It's coming.
You think about like virtual realities. I mean, there's a whole thing where essentially people are immersed into an atmosphere that they're not physically at. I mean, there's just so much that I think that we don't even know that it's coming.
Yeah,
absolutely. But I think this is good news, is that we've been so bad for so many decades, forgetting about people and place, and now see the long-term effects of that, the cost of doing anything, the health impacts, everything. Now we're going to be driven more and more to coming up with the answers, where just 5 or 10 years ago, communities weren't as stressed with their budget or whatever, that they could keep doing bad things. And now, whether it's artificial intelligence that helps us deliver stronger messages or whatever, we're going to refine what we do, and we're going to make it better and better. But end result is we have to have greater models. Everything we do, we need a block that works, so that the next block and the next block and the next block can be done better. We need our planning documents not just to have the code or the policy changes or whatever. We need to really focus on implementation. How do we get there?
Yeah.
And we've got to bring the public together to where they understand that they become the leaders in what the change is needed, right?
So you're no longer on the road 330 days a year. If you, I don't know, were you down to 230, 220, something like that? What's next for Dan Burton? What can we look forward to in the coming months or years?
Well, I feel there's always a role. I'm about to turn 80. So I've, most of my friends, I think all of them have now retired. I just want to keep doing what I do as long as I live and watch and mentor others. Yes, there's still leadership roles for me to play, but I think now we just tap into the great talent that's there ready to pick up whatever torch, and it will look different. What that person does is going to be very different than what I did for sure, but they're going to have more technology to work with. Their ability to get into a community and impact that community, though, is still going to follow very similar pathways from the past. That you got to be with people. You've got to have those one-on-one conversations, the small group conversations, and the very inspired presentation you give to a community. That's always going to be foundational if we're going to save a neighborhood, a town, or a whole region.
Very good. All right, Dan. Well, thank you very much for your time with the interview portion. We're going to move forward to our lightning round and just start having a good time with it. I'm going to just start off with, given your just extensive time on the road, what's the perfect road meal for Dan Burton?
Well, I hate to say it, but I try to stay away from the quick meals, and I get a real meal from time to time. I'm more of a plant-based person than anything, but I still enjoy the fast meal when I'm really rushed. Yeah.
Lots of
So
vegetables. Got it.
you have an estimate of how many frequent flyer miles you've amassed?
Well, just with one airline, Delta, I've got 3.5 million. I'm wanting to hit 4 million before I retire.
Just give a goal to Chris and Dawn. They want to match
my
your
gosh.
flight miles.
Yeah.
at
Yeah,
some point.
I've always said
Nope.
that
Nope.
status on those airlines, it's what you have to pay to get to that point on
Yeah.
it. Are you a window or an aisle guy? I think I know the answer
I'm
to
a window
this.
guy.
Yeah.
Window.
Sure.
I like
All
to
right.
look down and see where I am.
I have one that Chris and Donna are going to laugh at, but they talked about you had your walking shoes on, your favorite. What's your favorite pair of shoes? And they're laughing because I was always one that said I didn't like sensible shoes. I'm wearing cowboy boots, or high heels. But favorite pair of shoes? Are they really a walking pair of shoes?
Athletic shoes, yeah. And I do that because when I was younger and better health, I used to want to jog or whatever, and I just couldn't afford to carry 2 pair of shoes with me. So a good quality pair of tennis shoes is all I ever need.
I get
Yeah, I would
teased a
say
lot.
I don't think they make shoes for walking anymore. Even the popular brands wear out so fast. It's just like they kind of, unfortunately, that's a commentary on our culture in a lot of ways.
I was going to say more. I get teased because when I travel, I typically have almost as many pair of shoes as I do days of the travel week because I do,
Do you know how
we're
many
going walking.
you know how many missed flight connections Dan would have had he not been able to get it all in a backpack? I mean,
Very
Yeah.
true. Very true.
All right. So you now live in the Pacific Northwest, but
Correct.
spend a lot of time in Ohio. And so I'm curious, you have to make a choice here. You're going to go with Ivar's, right? Clam chowder or Cincinnati chili?
ooh.
Clam chowder. I just love the taste of clam chowder. The
Pretty hard to
composition.
beat, right? That was a
Are you
memory of mine
are
as
you
a kid.
hungry, Chris?
Yeah,
Are
I'm
you
getting there.
hungry? Because your questions are all
Well,
food.
it's a good subject for us. And I think back when I was a kid, Disneyland had a thing. It was one place in Disneyland that was out by, if you know that park, it was over by the Pirates of the Caribbean, the big water area. And at night, man, it was great because they had a full sourdough bread bowl that was filled with clam chowder, and it probably came out of a can. I mean, let's be real, right? But it was just the presentation, and everything was warm, and man, that was the way to go. So I'm with
But
you on that one.
it is interesting that food does bring me together because we went to Disneyland a lot when I was a child. We had family that lived there. And
Yeah,
the memory I have was the restaurant inside Pirates of the Caribbean because it was the only place you could get Monte Cristo sandwiches. And
I
so
just
it was
ate that. I just went
my
there.
favorite Monte Cristo
Yeah,
ever. And it probably isn't that great. It's just my memories around it from being a kid is inside Pirates of the
yeah.
Caribbean ride.
The Blue Bayou. We just ate
Yep.
there. I
All right.
saw the same thing a million times as a kid, and finally, as a 46-year-old, finally went there. So
We're
I
having
hear
a
what you're
moment
saying.
over Monte Cristos
We
and
are.
Pirates. So
So Dan, what's the last thing you added to your music playlist?
Music playlist. No, I like to go back to the classics. I just love any music that's inspiring to me. But yeah, I just love classical music and opera, and anything with the human voice.
I got one more kind of odd one for you, but somewhere on your LinkedIn profile, I found that you had a title of Director of Innovation and Inspiration, which is just such a cool one. Have you ever had another title, or what was it that you just thought, yeah, that's what I do?
Well, that is what I do. And I've had that title for close to 15 years.
Love it.
It doesn't matter what organization I'm with, I carry the title with me. So
That's great. I saw another folk that I stay in line with it. His title is Chief Storyteller. And I
Ooh,
just thought
that's a
that was a
nice
great
one.
one for a planner as well.
Chief.
I just
Yeah.
think
Chief
it
Storyteller.
says a lot about your individual accomplishments that you just carry the job title with you to where you go. That's like the ultimate, right? So,
Absolutely.
My last question before we wrap up here in a minute is, how many hours have you and Mark Fenton talked about mustache maintenance?
Oh, probably no more than 5 minutes, but Mark and I love comparing our mustaches, and he says I inspired him to grow a mustache.
I think, yeah.
True.
I think yours
Yeah.
birthed his. That's what I think, you know.
What I want to know is, Dawn, are they the one who inspired you to go to a mustache? Because he's there wanting to be part of that conversation.
yeah, I think so. I mean, even when you talked about the top 100 urbanists, I think when you break it down to urbanists with mustaches, that just becomes even a more refined list, right? I mean, it's either dudes back in the 1800s or Mark and Dan. So
There you go. There you go. All right. Well, Dan Burden, we are going to wrap this episode up. We thank you so much for your time and joining us. I know you're a busy guy and still doing wonderful things. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the Planning Commission podcast.
Thanks, Dan.
Pleasure.
and thanks
What a
for
treat
your
for me.
truly thanks for your inspiration. And like I said, it was all three of us sitting in those rooms nearly 20 years ago at Ada County Highway District trying to tilt that agency, but I think it also tilted us for everything else we've done in our career. And I say that with all the sincerity in the world.
Absolutely.
Oh, help it. Thank you so much for that.
All right. To our listeners, just as a quick reminder, head over to the website, www.theplanningcommissionpodcast.com. Like, subscribe, and again, send us a message. We'd love to hear from you. Commissioners, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right. With that, we're going to call this episode done. Thank you, listeners. We'll see you next time. Hey, everybody. Commissioner Danley here. Would you like to see more? Hear more? Well, we got you covered. Go to our website, www.theplanningcommissionpodcast.com. It's got everything you want. Guests, yep, past episodes, the video, the audio, even our whiskey pairing, links to everything about all the people we've had on, books, websites, you name it. It's unbelievable. If you want to reach out to us, please. We'd be more than happy to chat. You can email us, planningcommissionpodcast@gmail.com. You want to tweet at us? Go for it at Planning Commish. We're also on YouTube with the Planning Commission podcast channel, Facebook. Heck, send us a carrier pigeon if you need to. We'd love to hear from you about ideas, guests, you name it. Thank you for listening. We appreciate it. We'll keep doing our thing. You keep doing yours. Have a good one.